This peace treaty was really a brilliant achievement of the Ukrainian diplomacy. I mean, it's they who presented these 10 points, or they call it 10 proposals, and which they didn't really lose any territory. They only said we would negotiate for the Crimean Peninsula over the next 15 years, and in exchange for promising to stay neutral. The core issue of this war, actually, whatever we say today, that's of course not possible today anymore. So they're in a much, much worse position, and I think they're really being betrayed by us, because we insisted that they didn't sign the peace agreement that came out of Istanbul, and continue fighting, promising them that they would win the war. Now they don't. So they're in a very difficult position. Zelensky is in an extremely difficult position. We made them so many promises what they would do and what they would become, NATO, EU, and all the rest of it. That they would defeat Russia and all the rest of it. And now nothing of the things is true, and we just withdraw. I mean, the Americans basically have withdrawn from the Ukraine war. I mean, they will not participate in financing the 50 billion they had promised at the G7 meeting. Now the EU stepping in the 35 billion, money they don't even have. And, the Germans cut their military spending into half, and they promised weapons they had promised already before. So there's nothing new in it. So it's really, really an end game now. And very, very bad for the Ukrainians. I mean, these people must have suffered so much all the time. And I think the suffering will not be over even if there's peace. No? Peace can be very expensive and very brutal.
On this episode of the What the Finance podcast, I have the pleasure of welcoming on Michael von der Schulenberg. So Michael he's had a really interesting life, actually. So he worked for the United Nations and OSCE, including UN Assistant Secretary General. And reading through the countries that you've worked in, it's a lot of pretty dangerous places. Haiti, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran, Iraq, Syria, sort of all over the world. And now you're in the European Parliament. So Michael, thanks so much for coming on the podcast today.
It's the most dangerous place, I tell you.
Yeah, I could imagine you're going to watch your back.
It's a place I was most shocked about. I mean, I couldn't believe what I heard there. Yeah.
Oh, really? Interesting. I'm sure we'll get into that now. But normally where I like to start the conversations is starting quite broad, and then we can get into particular. So I'd be really interested in hearing your thoughts on, I guess, geopolitics currently, because, for many people like myself, it seems like we're in a very dangerous period of time globally. So I was wondering on what's your current thoughts on what's happening.
And now lots of things happening. Biden is coming. They don't have Rammstein anymore. Now the 4 presidents or prime minister will meet in Berlin, I think today, or tomorrow morning. And they will not invite Zelensky. Very important. They talk among themselves what to do. And I think the reason is really that the military situation is so difficult for the Ukrainians now that they feel that they have something to do. So let's see how they do something clever. The pressure they are under is if they now start to suggest a ceasefire, it would sound almost like an admission of defeat, and they wouldn't probably like it. So I hope they don't think about something crazy to do this. The other problem they face is, of course, if there's a ceasefire and it will continue, that Ukraine is not part of NATO, which is, of course, a result of it. People will start asking the question why we had the war all the time. We could have had the solution in the beginning without a war, and or at least 1 month into the war when the negotiations in Istanbul were. So I think these 4 people are in a very, very difficult position. So I hope they don't do anything foolish.
Yeah, definitely, because wasn't there was a peace treaty, or apparently, and then there's rumors that Boris Johnson flew into.
You mean I was very much
in 2022,
this peace treaty was really a brilliant achievement of the Ukrainian diplomacy. I mean, it's they who presented these 10 points, or they call it 10 proposals, and which they didn't really lose any territory. They only said we would negotiate for the Crimean Peninsula over the next 15 years, and in exchange for promising to stay neutral. The core issue of this war, actually, whatever we say today, that's of course not possible today anymore. So they're in a much, much worse position. And I think they're really being betrayed by us, because we insisted that they didn't sign the peace agreement that came out of Istanbul and continue fighting, promising them that they would live in the war. Now they don't. So they're in a very difficult position. Zelensky is in an extremely difficult position.
And what do you see currently happening there? Because it seems like there's he's continuing to ask for money. He's saying that Ukraine needs to join NATO, but it seems like on the front lines, there's slowly, they're sort of just being deteriorated by
He's asking especially for weapons, and he asks for long-range weapons because he wants to carry not only the war into Russia, but he wants to strike deep into Russia, including Moscow, and hoping that would sort of change the war. But it won't anymore, and I don't think it will happen. And so I think the only solution is now a ceasefire. And then is, of course, the big question, what happens to the rest of the Ukraine, because that will have enormous political implication. I've seen what means a ceasefire, for instance, in the Iran-Iraq war. I mean, that's almost became a civil war. And I think the same thing might be happening in Ukraine. No? I mean, there are huge divisions also on the Ukrainian side, and to accept a ceasefire after so many people being killed and accepting a ceasefire that is on such bad conditions for the Ukrainians, I would assume that we will have a very unstable Ukraine for a very long time, to say it mildly.
Yeah, that's a really sad thing to hear. So what would
I mean, you see in my articles, I usually don't attack or say anything critical about the Ukrainian Serbs, even not the government, which probably one could, because I think we made them so many promises what they would do and what they would become, NATO, EU, and all the rest of it, that they would defeat Russia and all the rest of it. And now nothing of the things is true. And we just withdraw. I mean, the Americans basically have withdrawn from the Ukraine war. I mean, they will not participate in financing the 50 billion they had promised at the G7 meeting. Now the EU is stepping in the 35 billion money they don't even have. And, the Germans cut their military spending into half, and they promised weapons they had promised already before. So there's nothing new in it. So it's really, really an end game now. And very, very bad for the Ukrainians. I mean, these people must have suffered so much all the time. And I think the suffering will not be over even if there's peace. No, peace can be very expensive and very brutal.
Yeah, and what do you think a ceasefire would look like now? Would that be, I know there's sort of 4 regions which have been invaded and taken over by Russia. Do you see those 4 regions?
That's why we didn't have a ceasefire before, because the West thought they could push Russia back and then negotiate, but this is not the case. If they go for a ceasefire now, I mean, they have to accept the line of control that is today. That's in all the wars the same. And if they can't do it militarily, that's what it is. And that is, of course, very embarrassing for them. That means that a quarter of the country is lost. And but if they don't do it now, the risk is that they're losing much more. It's an awful war. I mean, I feel so sorry for these Ukrainians. I mean, I mean, it's really the betrayed country in Europe. I mean, yeah, I hope it's a lesson for others not to go into such adventures for geopolitical interest of the West, no?
Yeah, because if we go, it's obviously hard to understand why these things happen, but there was a thinking, I think John Mearsham and a few others, who say that this NATO expansion actually influenced Russia to invade. I don't know if you have an opinion on that, or if you think it could have been a driver on the Russian side.
When you are a negotiator, because I know a little bit about this in my year past, one of the most difficult questions you have to answer is, what is the war? What is the war over? Why is the war? And that's not an easy question to answer. I think it's in the Ukraine-Russia war, it's very easy to answer, because we have the 10 proposals from Istanbul. It's very clear. Russia wanted not NATO on its border. It did not want to lose control over the Black Sea. And that's what the war went over. And I think we have to be honest. I mean, if something similar would happen to the United States, they would also go to war. If, let's say, Mexico suddenly joins another military alliance and puts them and allows them to install their missiles. I mean, the Americans would would go also mad. So it's something that should have been negotiated. It's a typical diplomatic issue one should negotiate, but we refused to negotiate, and that triggered the war. So I think they are just as guilty for the war.
Yeah, and I think if I look back at maybe the early years of
also by the UN Charter, no, I mean it's very clear. I mean.
Yeah, so I was going to say early years of the Biden administration, I felt like when they came in, they were very naive with how, they're saber wrestling. They were very, not aggressive, but they were sort of trying to put down Saudi Arabia. They were sort of trying to be very tough and strong rather than, I guess, being skillful, negotiating. And it seems to have sort of turned on them with all the conflicts happening globally. It's and now they're sort of trying to be a bit smarter about things. But yeah,
I think what went really wrong is that Biden didn't understand how much the time had already changed, because what he really wanted to do is, he said America is back again, compared to America might make America great again. I mean, he wanted to reassure the world that the United States stays the single superpower in the world that regulates conflicts and so on. Yeah, that has gone wrong, because the United States could do that in 1992, Wolfowitz Doctrine, because at the time they controlled the economy, they controlled technology, they controlled militarily, and they had the only functioning political system. But it's not so true today anymore. So they are not so powerful anymore. But they still conduct these wars as if they are. And this is what we see now. That's a meltdown of almost 30 years of misguided policy of wanting to be the hegemon of the world, and that's simply not working. I mean, NATO altogether is only 10% of the world, and I mean, why should the rest of the world be subject to them? And it just doesn't work. It also explains to you, Anthony, why the global South is not on the Western side. I mean, the very fact that BRICS, it's half of the world, BRICS, meets in Russia at this time, and there will be presidents and prime ministers coming at the time Russia is at war. It is a support for the Russian thing, because they don't want an expansion of NATO. They have had enough of a military hegemon who intervenes other countries without asking any questions. We see it's a real time change we see now. Unfortunately, it has cost a few 100,000 of young people their lives. Awful. I mean, I've seen wars, and I know how awful they are, and that why we have to prevent wars. I mean, wars never bring anything good.
Yeah, you could say one of the, if we look back in history, a recent geopolitical, maybe masterclass or great benefit was dividing the USSR and China in sort of the 70s, and then I think what's we're seeing with BRICS, it's not as if they're they're allies. It's just that there's these countries that have sort of been pushed away from this Western NATO sphere, and they've been pushed together because of, as you said, this saber rattling and this hegemony, and that seems to be the case. And I don't think it'd be too hard to bring them apart. It's just, maybe it's too far gone.
I mean, here in the European Parliament, I mean, when Mrs. von der Leyen gave a big speech about being re-elected, she didn't mention the BRICS countries a single time. But the BRICS countries are half of the world population, and the European Union is just 5%, or a little bit more than 5%. And economically, they control probably now, when the other members come, over 40% of the world economy, and Europe only 14%. I mean, we have to realize how much the world has changed, and we cannot, when she speaks about sanctions and she says somebody who's trading with Russia, we will sanction them too. I think she doesn't realize that she is now the mouse and the other one is the elephant. And what she says is actually completely lacks any realism. And that's not saying if I'm for or against something. It's just that in politics, you have to deal with realities. And if you lose it, I mean, you're on the losing side. And I think the European Union is in a really tough situation now. Mm-hmm. Very tough, I think, even.
Yeah, one of your articles talks about how the EU is isolating itself in foreign policy. So I'd be interested to hear more about that and why. Is that basically just what you've been talking about there?
Yeah, man. Look, I mean, tomorrow, Biden, the British stemmer, the Macron, and Scholz will sit together and seeing what to do with the war, while the European Parliament issues a resolution, and the reason is a new document to that, saying we should fight until Russia is defeated. I mean, what is this one? It makes this European Parliament completely irrelevant. Completely irrelevant. I mean, you can't ask this why you're losing the war.
Okay, so you think this is a driver?
I mean, if it wouldn't be so sad, one could almost laugh about this. I mean, in this parliament, the 495 people, including from the left, voted for a resolution of total war. A total war while the war is already lost. And I can't. I fail to understand that. I can only say that this European Parliament in Strasbourg is so removed from reality that they think they can decide whatever they want to. Mm-hmm. But it won't have any impact.
Okay,
I mean,
so
even European leaders now, Macron and Scholz belong to the European Union, will probably have to take another decision. Because as a prime minister, you have to deal with reality.
Yeah, so you're saying it's going away from the EU having control to the specific, the strong states, leaders, as well as you said, the UK and the US to make these decisions.
I mean, but it was all the time, when Putin asked for negotiations before he invaded, he wrote a letter to NATO and the United States. He left the Europeans completely out. I mean, that's was probably a fair judgment for him.
Yeah, and I guess if I look at the European Union's position in the world, it's putting sanctions on China and sort of moving away from China, which is a large trading partner. Obviously, Russia has sort of been blocked off for obvious reasons. And then US, there's this talk about, if Trump comes in, there'd be further conflicts. So it does seem as if Europe in general is at the risk of being isolated potentially.
Yeah, we lose economically, we lose technologically. There's a Draghi report now saying we have to we need 800 billion euros to revitalize us, which I doubt very much because he doesn't talk about the war. I mean, first of all, we have to end the war to have any chance. And the other thing is, then now we want to have a defense policy, which price ticket of $500 billion, all money Europe doesn't have. We just don't have the money, and borrowing it on the private market. I think there would be an upheaval in many countries who have to pay for it, like in Germany and Netherlands. And I mean, I can't see any policy the European Union pursues which have any chance of being implemented, really. Mm-hmm. I feel sorry for this because I feel very strongly pro-European. I think we should stick together. We should come together. But I think we should not try to develop the European Union into the military power at par with China and the United States, because it would never happen. We are much too divided. Our chance in Europe is our diversity, not our unity. We don't have a central government. This European Commission is not a central government. It's actually a quite undemocratic thing. I always laugh and say the European Union government structure reminds me of China.
And what do you mean by that? Can you expand on that?
Yeah, that you have an elite sort of government which is not elected, but it's been selected by merit. I mean, all these bureaucrats, and they run the show. And then they have a huge parliament somewhere who just says yes. And that's what we have too. I mean, it's a bit a joke, but there is some enormous similarity. Now, if we complain about China being not democratic, I mean, I could say the same thing of the European Union.
Yeah, I think that's what we're seeing globally. There's these large, in every country, there's this large, I guess, government machine working in the background that no matter who gets elected and these people remain there.
In the States, they call it the deep state, which is not a bad expression, actually, because nobody really sees who makes these decisions. I mean, now the decisions all made. I mean, I can't see that Biden really is able to make any decisions about somebody. It seems to make them, no? We don't know who. Mrs. Harris probably also not, no?
Hey everyone, sorry for interrupting. I just wanted to extend a massive thank you to you for listening and tuning in and for your support over these 3 years. So we've had, hundreds of guests that we've welcomed on the podcast. We've had millions of views. We've hundreds of thousands of different people listening in. So I just wanted to thank you. You know, I started this as a student. I'm now currently working, and I've always done this on the side just because I have a passion for it and I've enjoyed it. And probably similar to yourself, you listen to all these, different YouTube channels and podcasts of people listening to different guests. That's how I started, and I just wanted to sort of take the plunge and be able to have the opportunity to speak to these people, and you've made that happen. So thank you very much. Just myself, don't make any money from this, and it's really a passion project. So thanks for supporting that passion of mine. If you wanted to support the channel, all I ask is if you could like, subscribe, or even comment, positive or negative feedback. I'm always willing to take constructive criticism. I'd really appreciate that. But otherwise, thanks so much. If you can believe it, only 14% of our listeners actually subscribe to the podcast. So if you can, great. If not, no problem at all. Thanks for listening. And let's get back to the show.
I mean, who makes the decisions now? Who makes the decision that that Ukraine shouldn't use long-range missiles against Moscow? I mean, who makes this decision? It's a good decision, I hope, but I mean, who makes it? I don't know.
Not the voters. They don't have a say in it, it doesn't seem. But I guess one thing the EU is good at, which probably isn't a good thing, is very good at regulation. So I think that's sort of the thing that they've been pushing into. But I do fear that, I'm not trying to be anti-Europe. I think it's a great place. But I fear that if you continue down this route, get to the point where maybe the European market isn't large enough to be able to push it around, or maybe it will have an impact on innovation because the rest of the world will get the technology before it goes through the European regulation.
Yeah. I mean, from the party I represent there, we are very concerned that we have so much centralized into a European bureaucracy that that people feel alienated from the European Union. They feel that many things are regulated by people they don't know, but they haven't elected. Things which were never discussed. I mean, like this whole militarization, for instance. No, I mean, they use now the European Union to get it through, which would be on the national level very difficult to push through. So, I think the European Union is completely on the wrong track. No, it's a pity, really, a pity, because in Europe, with all our different states, I think we have to see that our diversity has an advantage. One of the first things the European Union did was that we all have the same number plates. They all look the same. Now there's a little F for France and a little D for Germany, but otherwise they have to look all the same. And I think, why? I mean, it's so nice that the French are different to Germans. I mean, I don't want any more Germans somewhere else. I mean, we have enough then of them. And I mean, I like to be Polish, that the Polish are different. Why not? And I think it's our great strength, and I think we should build on this one. But we have this funny idea now in the Commission that we have to create a super state.
So I guess, what would your perfect European Union look like in the future?
Yeah, it's a loose federation. No, that we had this in Germany, and for a long time, and it wasn't too bad at all. Mm-hmm. At least we were not so aggressive at the time. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so loose federation, but not this continued integration, which lots of
because it wouldn't work. Because we are too different, it wouldn't work. We would try to, now the Commission. I mean, Mrs. von der Leyen has a very doubtful democratic legitimation, but she now judges over Orban and people like this one. They push out penalties and they say they won't talk to him anymore, whatever. I mean, who are they? I mean, they haven't been elected, really. I mean, Orban has been elected, and he has been elected on a ticket which is different to what people are elected maybe in France or Germany. But he was elected, and that's part of the democracy. It has something to do with Hungarian history, their experience, why people vote like this one. And I think we should accept that.
Yeah, I do find it weird how she's elected, where I'm assuming that you had to vote, all the European parliamentarians vote.
I didn't vote for her. You can be sure for this one.
But it's weird because it seems like people were almost coerced. I don't know if this is true or not, but it does seem like there's a large group that were potentially coerced into.
Anthony, I don't understand it. I'm very new in this parliament, and I think the decisions they take, for instance, on war and peace with Iraq, or now on the Gaza war, I mean, we know that the majority of people in virtually all EU states are now against sending weapons and for negotiations. And we have a European Parliament who decides the opposite. How come? And it's only possible because I'm now in Holland, and there's a little shop here across the street, and they know that I'm now in the European Parliament. And they didn't even know that the Parliament is in Strasbourg. I mean, this European thing is so far removed from normal citizens, although they decide so much on their lives, that this is it's not a very good combination. It's not sustainable. We are in a crisis. I mean, I remember when the British moved out, whether it's good or bad is another thing. But when they moved out, there was all this promise that we have to rethink the whole thing. We didn't rethink anything. We just continued the way of having a highly centralized state, or quasi-state. It's not really a state, and who takes, some say, two-thirds of all decisions about our lives. It's been taken now over there. On things, very frankly, which probably a mayor of a town could much better decide. I mean, that's what it is. Now von der Leyen started to build up for a unit for housing. I mean, housing. I mean, isn't a town of Berlin or Munich or, I don't know, Vienna deciding this much better on a local level? I didn't understand it. I mean, why does the EU has to control all these things? Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's what Switzerland's done very well, power in the local, at the local level.
They're doing very well with it, no?
Yeah.
You have, of course, to learn to be more tolerant to each other, no?
It does seem like, maybe, and I don't know, this is obviously quite generalizing, but if you look at maybe the liberal left, it does seem to be very intolerant to other people's opinions. I'm not sure if that's something that's happened recently, and I think that's sort of to do with your own party and why maybe there's that you've created this party, or not yourself, but you've joined this party.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm always surprised that we have a political elite that has done financially very well for them. I mean, we shouldn't forget the Bundestag just increased their salaries and things like this one. They did very well for them, and they make decisions, and somehow seems that it doesn't go well with what people really want, and elections even sort of don't bring it out. Although we saw now in the regional elections in Germany a huge change where the Ampel coalition, these parties have really badly lost. I mean, the Free Democrats, they won't be even in the parliaments anymore, and the Greens are kicked out of two of the parliaments. So there is a change taking place, but I think not enough, because the state structure has become so powerful and with so much money, and that they push their way through whatever people decide, no, or want to have. That's a big problem. We have a real big problem in governance in Europe, no? I mean, you have it in the States too, but in a different way. But you have at least a central government. But don't forget, you have it because you had, what was it, 4 or 5 years civil war. It was still the bloodiest war the United States was ever in. Cost more lives per population than any of your other wars. No, I mean, that's what created the central state. I hope we don't go through this in Europe, which is not possible, because then Germany, as the biggest state, would, of course, I mean, people would hate us just. Wait a minute, Germany has now the highest military budget. Do you think over long the other European states will like that? It's not Russia the problem. It's maybe France and Netherlands who don't like it, no?
Yeah.
I mean, they have some experience with us, no? Or Poland.
Well, I think that's the risk, that you don't learn from the past. If you think about, if you ignore, and, you might disagree with them, but there's lots of people who are frustrated. There's lots of people who feel like they haven't been heard, that the political elite are ignoring them. And if you just continue to, not you, but just if the members continue to ignore them, that's when you get, all extremes, and that's when the real risk occurs. And that's what I'm personally concerned about.
At the same time, the economy goes down. I mean, there was just in Germany a recent opinion poll, no, which they say among especially young people, the greatest problem they say the fear of war, and the second one is the fear that they won't have a future anymore. I mean, these are terrible outcome of such a poll, and we have to take this seriously. These are young people.
Yeah, definitely. So maybe if we go back to the you said the UN Charter, if that was followed, then this war would have been avoided. So I'm not sure if you can maybe go further into that.
We haven't basically abolished the UN Charter in the West, and we speak now about the rule-based order, which of course is nowhere fixed, and no country has signed up to it. I mean, this is just a sort of a dream thing of a powerful states. No, I think we have to go back to the UN Charter, because the UN Charter was a lovely document. And for me, very, very important still. It says basically no more war, never again war. That's what the UN Charter says. That all 193 states have agreed to a charter which says no more war, and it said to prevent wars we have to negotiate until we solve our problems. And that's exactly what we didn't do in the Ukraine context. I mean, the West simply ignored it, and they said, this is none of Russia's. Russia cannot say what Ukraine is doing in a military thing, which is not true, because we have also the Charter of Paris, which is very clear on this issue. So we just pushed it over, and we thought we are strong enough to be able to get our way outside the UN Charter, and then I think that's really explains the war. We have to go back to the UN Charter, and I'm now invited by BRICS to go to Sochi, and I will also speak there. And BRICS, of course, is now 9 countries, and they will probably, by the time I come there, might be 15 or even more. And their thing is, they want to adhere to the UN Charter, but not us. We invented the UN Charter, but we don't want to adhere to it anymore. And they want to observe sovereignty, and sovereignty means non-interference into the internal affairs of another state. But that's what we do all the time, and especially this European Parliament, everything they make a comment on. And I think that that they will get right in the end, not us. The world has changed.
Do you see the Iraq war, or at least the early 2000s, as that time where it changed? Because now it's sort of like the West are hypocrites because they've already broken it.
It all started. I mean, during the Cold War, the UN Charter was maybe frozen, but none of the two sides would say we don't recognize the UN Charter anymore. There was nothing. That started also only in 92 with the Wolf-Figures doctrine, saying now the Americans are so strong that they could now decide how this world is run, and so on. And this led, of course, according to the Research Council attached to the US Congress, the US intervened in the 30 years between 92 and 2022 251 times in other states. I mean, unbelievable. 10 times a year. I mean, and we don't write about this. We don't even know about this. But that's a US statistics, and it doesn't even include where we have proxy wars. I mean, where we have only sent weapons and not gone directly military into it, and it doesn't exclude also CIA operations of regime change. So I think we were in the last years so enormously active in the rest of the world, trying to model it according to us. And we lost all of them. I think there is not a single of these military operations which have led to more democracy, to more rule of law, to a more prosperous country. It's all the same, all the opposite. It left only chaos, anarchy, and a lot of human misery behind. And that's what we did. And that's why the BRICS countries now want to have a different world. And I think they're right.
Do you think the UN has lost its relevance, and can it continue?
No, I think it will become more important than ever.
And is that just going back to, I guess the challenge is that some people say it's been broken once, it'll be broken again. So do you need to sort of completely revolutionize this system or create something new?
No, I know that's all the discussion. I get so many papers because I worked on these things from people who suggested that different UN. I don't believe in any of them. I think we would today not be able to have a UN charter. But Anthony, if our aim is that we want to live in a world of a global order that is not imposed by superior weapons, then we have to have international law, and that's the UN Charter. We don't have an alternative. And if you think that the UN Charter was essentially to regulate wars among states, we have also to realize that the weapon technology has developed in such a way that we couldn't even afford wars anymore. I mean, wars, if we really states go into wars, we destroy us all completely. So we have to come to a different world in which we say, okay, we have to regulate things by negotiating, by agreeing on things, by sharing, by making compromises. There is really no alternative to it. Otherwise, we head for total destruction. How does the United States want to have a war with China? I mean, it's just ridiculous, no? I mean, even Israel now. I mean, look, there's now reports that the Iranian might have exploded their first nuclear device. I mean, this little state of Israel, if they would continue attacking Iran like this, one day they have a nuclear bomb on their head, and it's such a small country that one would probably be the end of it, and then trigger all the consequences. We have to find a different world, and this world is basically what is described in the UN Charter. You won't get anything better than this.
Yeah, and I think
but
as we know, what we've been doing hasn't worked.
It was on a voluntary basis, and it has to. States have to agree that this is a better world if we follow what our forefathers has once done. It's the two documents which really decides our future. It's the UN Charter, and then of course the human rights, and both were actually present made by the United States to the world, and unfortunately they try to destroy it, and I hope that one day they will come back to it and say that's probably also for them the better way. But that for this one, the states have to agree. I mean, and the problem is the West, because we have these enormously aggressive attitudes to the rest of the world. We have to understand that it's democracies who have most of the wars, who kill most of the civilian people, who have most of the human rights abuses in the world. It's democracies. And we say democracy is a good thing. I mean, how do the other countries want to be democracies with this one? Yeah, the worst one.
Yeah, it does seem like there's the risk of these large institutions that are over multiple countries, such as EU, UN, the WHO, all these institutions. There's not as much trust currently as there were. So as you said, there needs to be a reset of, I guess, compromise and relationships between all the countries to bring back the trust.
Yeah, but the UN is not a super state. The EU, when you talk to UN, if you talked about the United Nations, you talk about 193 countries. You don't talk about the administration in New York or something like this one. No, it's these countries, and they simply have to behave according to what they have agreed on. And I hope that human people are rational enough to in the end come up to understand that there is no alternative to it. So I would not compare the UN to the European Union. European Union tries to become a sort of super state, but the UN is not the same. It's actually weak. My final report, and after leaving Iraq, I gave it a heading, and I called it "The Old Man Without Teeth." And then they asked me to change the title, which I of course didn't do. And I didn't mean it negative. When you have conflicts in most countries of the world, I mean, especially more traditional countries, you would ask an old man to come to negotiate and try to bring peace again among communities or villages or whatever, tribes and things like this one. So it's usually the old men who don't have much teeth anymore who bring peace, and because they are so weak, they would not be able to have a war themselves, or they have no interest of controlling anything because they age and things like this one. And I think the United Nations is similar to that. So I think it has something very nice about it.
Yeah, no? But then, that's when I was saying it may be.
The European Union. They want to militarize. The UN had doesn't have money, if its own, it doesn't have any taxes, it doesn't have any army, and so on. I mean, we all depend of other states agreeing among themselves that this is a useful thing to do. And I think we have no alternative than doing this. Otherwise, we fall back to Wolfowitz, who thinks that there has to be a strong military power who rules the world in order, Pax Britannica, Pax Americana, but I think it's not working anymore. Simply because the world has changed. When the Berlin Wall fell and the Cold War ended, and you look at the newspapers at the time or in the media, you only see white people. I mean, it was all white people, maybe a Japanese in between, but they were all white people who commented. Today, unthinkable. Now people realize we are a minority in the world.
Yeah, definitely. So, Michael, thanks so much. We've gone in all the different directions. But my last question is, what is one message you'd like? No, that's all right. It's good. What is one message you'd like people to take away from our conversation?
I think that peace starts with us. I think the nicest thing about the UN Charter is how it starts. It says we the people, and that we want to prevent future generations of wars. And I think that's something that talks to all of us. And all of us has to think of how we persuade our governments and how we correct media who is so pro-war and things like this one. It is all our responsibility to mend peace. There is no other solution to this.
Yep, that's a great message. So thanks again for your time. Hey everyone, thank you for listening. I really appreciate the support. If you've got value out of this, I'd really appreciate it if you could like, subscribe, or comment, good or bad feedback. I'm always open to that, but it really helps with the channel. As I said before, only about 14% of people actually subscribe to this channel. So if you were to that, it would really help. It could mean we could continue to grow. If not, thanks for watching and see you on the next show. And you also might like this video right here. All right, thanks again.